things that have happened throughout history in the church is alive and well. And we know that, we celebrate that because we know that ultimately it's not human beings who are always moronic and idiotic and mess things up, but it's ultimately God through the Holy Spirit that is in charge. And that somehow through it all, in spite of the ups and downs and all that, we can look back and see God's guiding hand and looking at the big picture, the macro picture, if you will, kept things going and actually in fairly good shape, all things considered. And so God asks us to trust that we don't always look at the minor, obvious, painful, idiotic things that fall in front of us, but always the big picture, trusting like the apostles had to do, that the Holy Spirit would come, that the Holy Spirit would guide us. I mean, if you even look at who Jesus chose to be his apostles, they were the worst of the worst, the dumbest of the dumb, the slimiest of the slimy in those days. And yet somehow those are the people that Jesus chose to start the church. So if they can survive all that, we can survive all that. Not only in the big picture, but the little picture as well. So, Tina, what's your second favorite color?
Green.
All right. What's your second favorite movie? Or song?
Okay, it's harder.
For what?
That's more difficult for me to think of right now.
Can you think of the first? Is it easier to think of your favorite or your second favorite of anything?
Favorite.
All right, well, try thinking of your second favorite anything. That's a little bit harder, but it can be done. I can tell you my second favorite book in the whole world. My favorite book, of course, being the Bible, that I recommend. My second favorite, that's always an easy and quick answer for me. I make my students read this book. And I would highly recommend this book to all of you. If you've never read a book called Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, I highly recommend that book. Everybody should have to read that book. It's an easy book to read because it's mostly stories about Viktor Frankl himself, who was a Jewish psychiatrist who was interned by the Nazis during the Second World War in a concentration camp. Now, of course, the Nazis were quite good at and famous for just putting people in the concentration camps and killing them, but they also needed a lot of slave labor. And Viktor Frankl got, because he was pretty young at the time, got put in a labor camp. And even in the labor camp, many people died because they were, of course, undernourished. They weren't kept warm enough, certainly not enough food, no medical care, treated horribly, constantly beaten by guards. And Viktor Frankl, who was a doctor, got just slightly better treatment. And what he did while he was in there, he said, well, I'm in here, I might as well do something useful for my profession. And he started observing and noticing something very interesting in the concentration camps. He noticed who lived and who died. Now, you'd think that'd be an easy thing to do, that the younger, healthier, stronger people would be the ones that would survive the cruel and heartless conditions, but that wasn't the case at all. Being young and healthy and strong, as Viktor Frankl studied it, was no advantage at all. They didn't die any less than other people did. They didn't run into the barbed wire and deliberately commit suicide by getting machine gunned any less than anybody else did. What Viktor Frankl noticed about who lived and who died had nothing to do with their age or their level of strength. It had everything to do with their spirituality. The people who lived were people who had something to live for. They were people of faith. People who had the strongest belief in God and the strongest desire, as he did, to see their families again. That's what would keep people from committing suicide in the camps. That's what would keep them alive when all hope seemed lost. And this book brilliantly lays out his observations of that, and subsequently his development of a whole field of psychology based on that. But this idea that if you have a why, you can live with any how. Does that make sense? Which is the whole point of the book. If you have a why, you can live with any how. Shows us that on the micro level, the Holy Spirit works too. That in our lives, He gives us people, and He gives us relationships with God, with other people, that do keep us going through difficult times, and we've all faced those difficult times. I mean, look at you. You all must be the ones that couldn't afford to go away for the weekend. That was Father Mike's observation. We've all had difficult times, and yet, for some reason, we've all kept through because of our faith, because of the people that God has sent us in our lives. They remind us to keep going, that the journey is not the end, but the heaven that awaits us at the end. And so, today we celebrate that even though we don't always see Him, even though we don't always feel Him, we know that somehow the Holy Spirit is there guiding not only the church in spite of its ups and downs and foibles, but also us individually in the difficulties of our own lives. So confident that God, through the Holy Spirit, remains with us always.